No different than alcohol prohibition was corrupting to government and to law enforcement back in the 30s. It's just as bad, if not more now. And it impacts everything that we do. No matter what our personal beliefs are on Occupy Wall Street, the one thing that Occupy Wall Street that I completely agree with, it has shined a light on what I call crony capitalism in law enforcement and public safety. And so I have, this is, my pet peeve, and this is what people don't understand. If you start looking at lobbying at the level, whether it's local, state, or federal, law enforcement lobbying has a direct impact on any reform movement moving forward, simply because politicians cater to public safety endorsement, and they don't want to make them mad. And it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, a lot, and I'm broad, this is a broad sweep because I've met some great Republicans that, are very, very constitutional oriented, and there's some Democrats that are doing a great job too. But overwhelmingly in California, the Democrats have held the House since the 1980s. And we just keep getting tougher on drugs, and we're not doing anything. It's not changing. There's no metric. But law enforcement lobbying is, in my opinion, unethical. They shouldn't be allowed to do it. I understand collective bargaining. That's a whole different thing. But law enforcement was placed into the executive branch of our government for a particular reason, no different than the military. They're not supposed to enact laws. In California, law enforcement lobbying is responsible not only for enacting laws, but for stopping some great laws that would help law enforcement do their job more effectively. But they're so stuck in that moral rhetorical war. And what you see is, I spent almost 22 years in law enforcement. I think I looked at my training records recently, and I think I had something like 26 or 2,700 hours of training. And not 1 hour, not 1 day, not 1 minute was being taught the true basis of the drug laws, going back into the history and seeing the racist basis of those laws.
Yes. I think to anyone who revisits that whole era and how drug prohibition came about in the first place is very surprised and appalled, I would hope.
Completely.
Yeah.
But yet, law enforcement doesn't teach that. And even if they just taught it to the sense of trying to understand the communities that you serve, I have this whole, as I call it, my mantra. In California, and I don't know how it is in Florida, but in California, law enforcement receives their statutory authority under a penal code section called 832 of the Penal Code. And in that statutory authority, it doesn't describe us as police officers, Jen. It describes us as peace officers.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real nuance connotation in how you view your role in the community.
Well, yeah, and back to, as a police officer, I would imagine that once that realization really hits you, that it has to be a bit frustrating, if not disturbing, to know that the role you're playing may be more detrimental than it is helpful in some aspects, in that one aspect with the war on drugs. When you really take a look at the micro situations on how it affects the family, and I would say, being a mother, that one of the most important things to us is our children, and how drug prohibition affects, and I say this is why it should be every mother's fight, because whether you're looking at how Prohibition affects our kids when they get arrested for drug possession, or how it affects our children when their parents get arrested for drug possession. It can be completely devastating on the family. It can take a functioning family down to the status of a welfare family. And also, you know, the interpersonal relationships within that family. One, you're dealing with drug use and or abuse, okay? And two, then when you add the legal aspect into it and the financial aspect into it, it can literally tear a family apart. So what I'd like to do is I'd really like to get your thoughts on that as well. And pretty much what you've seen firsthand. Yeah.
You know what's so hard? Here's the thing with law enforcement. There are times that you have to police people, and then you revert back to serving your community. So having had to take a child away from their parents was probably the most devastating, almost one of the most devastating things that I had to deal with, in the sense that the first kid that I ever took out of someone's home, and this was for physical abuse. This wasn't for drugs, okay? No. This was just for a true legitimate child abuse issue.
Sure.
And I remember walking down, so we get called out to help social services, and I remember taking this kid who's been battered and holding her in my arms as we're walking down a set of stairs, and she is grabbing at the rails, trying to hang on, screaming and crying at the top of her lungs. Mommy, Mommy, Daddy, Daddy, Mommy. It was horrific. And I wasn't even a mom back then. And I just remember that what hit me was the power that law enforcement had, that they can come in and take your child away from you.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that power isn't held in check sometimes because of concerns of liability. What happens if we leave this child in the house and something happens? We're going to get sued. And so there's this fear in law enforcement that by doing the compassionate thing and helping the family, you know, work towards building their future, that we can't do that because we're afraid of liability, that someone's going to come back on us. So that's part of that issue and the problem. But the other one is that the zero tolerance of drugs in our society forces law enforcement to take kids away, because by law they have to. They can't have any compassion. You know, so if drugs were appropriately regulated, or let's at least start with marijuana. You know, in California, you have a lot of counties that are actively taking kids away from their parents because they're medical marijuana patients.
Oh, geez. That to me is such a travesty.
Horrible travesty. Horrible
yes,
travesty.
It really is. It is. It's wrong. It's just plain. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
It's wrong. Yeah.
And it's because Department of Children's Services and the court, whether it's the dependency court or divorce court, at this point, because the federal government says that marijuana is illegal, that we're not going to allow it. That even if you can't prove that there's a detrimental impact to that child, you could have a totally healthy, happy kid. Parents are getting, you know, process of divorce, and I've seen cases like this. The mom or the dad will say, the other parent's a medical marijuana patient, and they lose their rights to their kid. Or they have to give up that medication that may be better for them than a harder psychotropic medication, or, you know, some type of harder pain pill that is actually worse on someone's body than cannabis.
Right.
So the whole system needs to be looked at. So I had a case years ago that we were actually serving a narcotic search warrant, and we walked into this house, and it was a heroin dealer. And the floor, when you walked in, like the floor started moving, it was that filthy that the whole floor was cockroaches.
Oh, my.
Okay? They had a baby in there that was an infant that really ended up being like a 6-month-old baby. It was a failure to thrive baby. And the only person that was taking care of this baby was the prostitute, because the mother wasn't paying any attention to the baby because the dad thought that the baby was sired by someone else. So there were no toys. There was no baby food. It was horrific. So we did the right thing by taking that child away. But if we had no drug war, maybe that baby would have been born into a better environment than having to live with a underground market, black market drug dealer. Maybe the circumstance would have been different. I don't know. You know, I think we're always going to have issues in our society. Ending the drug war is not going to remove all issues, but it's going to remove a lot of issues.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And I think that's really important for us to understand. And so the drug war, the laws, prohibition itself, causes more damage to families and to children than if we just allowed a parent to be a drug addict in some aspects. You can be a functioning drug addict if you have public health support.